Greetings, everybody. GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We are getting so close. Last few chapters of our novel here, and our last one wasn't the most eventful one. Thrall interrogated Blackmore's number 2 guy, and basically just found out Blackmore wanted to use you basically in what you're already doing now. It just helped humanize, I guess, Blackmore to Thrall, and then Thrall's like, all right, now we're turning to Durnholde to attack. So stay a while and listen, and let's see how that goes here in Chapter 18, although I don't think we're going to get to the finale battle quite yet. I'm expecting this is going to be, I don't know, I've got a bad feeling. I think dark things are going to happen in this chapter. Chapter 18 of Lord of the Clans. Even on the coldest days of winter, save when there was an active blizzard preventing anyone departing Durnholde, Taretha had gone to visit the lightning-felled tree, and each time she peered into the tree's black depths, she saw nothing. She enjoyed the return of warmer weather, though the snow-melt-saturated earth sucked on her boots, and more than once succeeded in pulling one off. Having to tug her boot free and put it on a second time was a trivial price to pay for the fresh smells of the awakening woods, the shafts of sunlight piercing the darkness of the shadows, and the astounding blaze of color that dotted the meadows and forest floor alike. Thrall's exploits had been the talk of Durnholde. The conversation served only to increase Blackmore's drinking, which at times was not a bad thing. More than once she had arrived at his bedchamber and entered quietly to find the master of Durnholde asleep on a floor, chair, or bed, a bottle somewhere nearby. On those nights, Taretha Foxton breathed a sigh of relief, closed the door, and slept alone in her own small room. A few days ago, Lord Langston had returned with tales that sounded too preposterous to frighten a child still in the nursery. And yet, hadn't she read of ancient powers the orcs had once possessed? Powers in harmony with nature long ago? She knew that Thrall was profoundly intelligent, and it would not at all surprise her to discover that he had learned these ancient arts. Taretha was approaching the old tree now and looked into its depths with a casualness born of repetition, and gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth as her heart began to pound so fiercely she feared she would faint. There, nestled in a brown-black hollow, was her necklace. It seemed to catch the sunlight and glow like a silver beacon to her. With trembling fingers, she reached for it, grasped it, and then dropped it. "Clumsy," she hissed, picking it up again with a slightly steadier hand. It could be a trick. Thrall could have been captured and the necklace taken from him. It might even have been recognized as hers. But unless Thrall told someone about their compact, who would know to leave it here? She was certain of one thing: nobody could break Thrall. Tears of joy filled her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She wiped at them with the back of her left hand, the right one still cradling the crescent pendant. He was here, in these woods, likely hiding in the dragon-like cliffside. He was waiting for her to help him. Perhaps he was injured. Her hands folded over the necklace, and she tucked it inside her dress, carefully out of sight. It would be best if no one saw her missing necklace. Happier than she had been since she had last seen the orc, and yet filled with worry for his safety, Taretha returned to Durnholde. The day seemed to last forever. She was grateful that the dinner tonight was fish. More than once she'd gotten ill on poorly prepared fish. The chef at Durnholde had served with Blackmore in battle over 20 years ago. He had been hired as a reward for his service, not for his cooking. Of course, she did not eat at the table in the great hall with Blackmore. He would not dream of having a servant girl sit beside him in front of his noble friends. Good enough to bed, not good enough to wed, she thought, recalling the old childhood verse. All the better tonight. "You seem a bit preoccupied, my dear," Temma said to his daughter as they sat together at the small table in their quarters. "Are you well?" The slightly strained tone of his voice and the frightened look her mother gave Taretha at the question almost made her smile. They were worried that she was pregnant. That would help with her deception tonight. "Very well, Da," she answered, folding her hand over his. "But this fish, does it taste all right to you?" Clania prodded her own fish and cream sauce with her two-pronged fork. "Tastes well enough for being Randrill's cooking." In truth, the fish was fairly tasty. Still, Taretha took another bite, chewed, swallowed, and made a slight face. She made a bit of a show of pushing the plate away from her. As her father peeled an orange, Taretha closed her eyes and whimpered. "I'm sorry." She rushed out of the room to her own quarters, making noises as if she was about to be sick. She reached her room on the same floor as her parents and made loud noises over the chamber pot. She had to smile a little. It would be amusing, were the stakes not so high. There came an urgent knock on the door. "Darling, it's me," called Clania. She opened the door. Taretha put the empty chamber pot out of sight. poor dear, you look pale as milk. That at least Taretha didn't have to feign. Please, can thou have a word with my master? I don't think... Clania coloured bright pink. Although everyone knew that Taretha had become Blackmore's mistress, no one spoke of it. Certainly, my dear, certainly. Would you like to stay with us tonight? No, she said quickly. No, I'm fine. I'd just like to be alone for a bit. She lifted her hand to her mouth again, and Clania nodded. As you will, Tari, dear. Good night. Let us know if you need anything. Her mother closed the door behind her, and Taretha let out a long, deep breath. Now to wait until it was safe to leave. She was next to the kitchens, one of the last places that settled down for the night. When all was still, she ventured forth. First she went to the kitchens, placing as much food as she could lay her hands on into the sack. Earlier today she had torn up some old dresses for bandages should Thrall need them. Blackmore's habits were as predictable as the sun's rising and setting. If he started drinking at dinner, as was his wont, he would be ready to entertain her in his bedchamber by the time dinner was over. Afterward he would fall into a slumber, almost a stupor, and there was very little that could rouse him until sunrise. She had listened to the servants in the great hall and ascertained that he had, as usual, been drinking. He had not seen her tonight, and that would put him in a foul mood, but by now he would be asleep. Gently, Taretha unlocked the door to Blackmore's quarters. She let herself in, then closed the door as quietly as possible. Loud snoring met her ears. Reassured, she moved steadily toward her gate to freedom. Blackmore had boasted about this many months ago when he had been in his cups. He had forgotten he had told her about it, but Taretha remembered. Now she went to the small desk and opened a small drawer. She pressed gently on it, and the false bottom came loose in her hand, revealing a tiny box. Taretha removed the key and returned the box to the drawer, closing it carefully. She then turned toward the bed. On the right side, a tapestry hung on the stone wall. It depicted a noble knight doing battle with a fierce black dragon defending a huge pile of treasure. Taretha brushed the tapestry aside and found the room's real treasure, a hidden door. As quietly as she could, she inserted the key, turned it, and opened the door. Stone steps led down into darkness. Cool air bathed her face, and a scent of wet stone and mold assaulted her nostrils. She swallowed hard, facing her fear. She did not dare to light a candle. Blackmore slept deeply, but the risk was far too great. If he knew what she was doing, he'd have her flogged raw. Think of Thrall, she thought. Think of what Thrall has faced. Surely she could overcome a fear of the darkness for him. She closed the door behind her and was suddenly standing in a blackness so absolute she could almost feel it. Panic rose up in her like a trapped bird, but she fought it down. There was no chance of getting lost here. The tunnel led only one way. She took a few deep, steadying breaths and then began. Cautiously, she descended the steps, extending her right foot each time to search for the next one. Finally, her feet touched earth. From here, the tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle. She recalled what Blackmore had told her about it. Got to keep the Lord safe, my dear, he said, leaning over her so she could smell his wine-scented breath. And if there's a siege, well, there's a way we can be safe, you and I. It seemed to go on forever. Her fears battled with her mind for control. What if it collapses? What if after all these years it's blocked? What if I trip here in the darkness and break my leg? Angrily, Taretha silenced the voices of terror. Her eyes kept trying to adjust to the darkness, but with no light whatsoever, they only strained futilely. She shivered. It was so cold down here in the dark. After what seemed an eternity, the ground began to gradually slope upward again. Taretha resisted the urge to break into a run. She would be furious with herself if she lost control now and tripped. She pushed forward steadily, though she could not help but quicken her pace. Was it her imagination, or was there a lightening of this dreadful darkness? No, she was not imagining it. Up ahead it was definitely lighter. She drew closer and slowed. Her foot struck something, and she stumbled forward, striking her knee and outthrust hand. There were different levels of stone. Steps. She reached out a hand, moving upward, step by slow step, until her questing fingers touched wood. A door. She had reached a door. Another horrible thought seized her. What if it was bolted from the outside? Wouldn't that make sense? If someone could escape Durnholde by this route, someone else with hostile intentions might be able to enter the same way. It was sure to be locked or bolted, but it wasn't. She reached upward and pushed with all her strength. Ancient hinges shrieked, but the door swung open, falling flat with a loud bang. Taretha jumped. It was not until she lifted her head up to the small square opening, the light seeming to her eyes as bright as day, that she breathed a sigh of relief and permitted herself to believe it was true. The familiar smells of horses' leather and hay filled her nostrils. She was in a small stable. She stepped fully out of the tunnel, whispering softly and reassuringly to the horses that turned to look with mild inquiry at her. There were 4 of them, their tack hung on the wall. She knew at once where she must be. Near the road, but fairly far from Durnholde, was a courier station where riders whose business could not be delayed changed exhausted mounts for fresh ones. The light came through chinks in the walls. Taretha quickly closed the trap door in the floor through which she had entered and hid it with some hay. She went to the stable door and opened it, almost blinking in the full blue-white light provided by the 2 moons. As she had surmised, she was on the outskirts of the small village that encircled Durnholde, inhabited by those who made their living off tending to the needs of the fortress's inhabitants. Taretha took a moment to get her bearings. There it was, the cliff face she had as a child imagined to be so like a dragon. Thrall would be waiting there for her in the cave, hungry and perhaps injured. Buoyed by her victory over the dark tunnel, Taretha raced toward him. When he saw her running over the crest of the small hill, her slim figure silver in the moonlight, Thrall was hard-pressed not to let out a shout of joy. He contented himself with rushing forward. Taretha froze, then lifted her skirts and ran toward him in return. Their hands met and clasped, and as the hood fell back from her tiny face, he saw her lips were wide in a smile. "Thrall!" she exclaimed. "It is so good to see you, my dear friend." She squeezed the 2 fingers her own little hands could hold as tightly as she could, and almost bounced with excitement. "Taretha," he rumbled affectionately. "Are you well?" The smile faded, then returned. "Well enough. And you? We've heard of your doings, of course. It is never pleasant when Lord Blackmore's in a foul mood, but as it means that you are free, I have come to look forward to his anger. Oh," with a final squeeze, she dropped Thrall's hands and reached for the sack she had been carrying. "I did not know if you were wounded or hungry. I wasn't able to bring a great deal, but I brought what I could. I have some food and some skirts I tore up for bandages. It's good to see you don't need—" "Tari," Thrall said gently, "I did not come alone." He signaled to his scouts who had been waiting in the cave, and they emerged. Their faces were twisting into scowls of disapproval and hostility. They drew themselves up to their full height, folded their arms across their massive chests, and glared. Thrall watched her reaction carefully. She seemed surprised, and for a brief moment, fear flitted across her face. He didn't suppose he could blame her. The 2 outriders were doing everything they could to appear menacing. Finally, though, she smiled and strode up to them. "If you are friends of Thrall, then we are friends also," she said, extending her hands. One of them snorted in contempt and batted her hand away, not hard enough to hurt her, but enough to throw her slightly off balance. "War Chief, you ask too much of us," one of them snapped. "We will spare the females and their young as you command, but we will not—" "Yes, you will," Thrall replied. "This is the female who risked her life to free me from the man who owned both of us. She is risking her life again to come to our aid now. Taretha can be trusted. She is different." He turned to regard her fondly. "She is special." The scouts continued to glare, but looked less certain of their prejudgment. They exchanged glances, then each took Taretha's hands in turn. "We are grateful for what you have brought," said Thrall, switching back to human speech. "Rest assured, it will be eaten and the bandages kept. I have no doubt that they will be needed." The smile faded from Tari's face. "You intend to attack Durnholde," she said. "Not if it can be avoided, but you know Blackmore as I do. On the morrow, my army will march to Durnholde, prepared to attack if needed. But first I will give Blackmore the opportunity to talk to us. Durnholde is the center of the camp controls. Break it, we break all the camps. But if he is willing to negotiate, we will not shed blood. All we want is to have our people freed, and we will leave the humans alone." Her fair hair looked silver in the moon's light. She shook her head sadly. "He will never agree," she said. "He is too proud to think of what would be best for those he commands." "Then stay here with us," said Thrall. "My people will have orders not to attack the women and children, but in the heat of battle I cannot guarantee their safety. You will be at risk if you return." "If I am discovered missing," Tari replied, "then that would alert someone that something is going on. They might find and attack you first, and my parents are still there. Blackmore would take out his anger on them, I am sure. No, Thrall, my place is and always has been at Durnholde, even now." Thrall regarded her unhappily. He knew, as she could not, what chaos battle brought, what blood and death and panic. He would see her safe if he could, but she was her own person. "You are courageous," said one of the scouts, speaking up unexpectedly. "You risk your personal safety to give us our opportunity to free our people. Our war chief did not lie. Some humans, it would seem, do understand honor, and the orc bowed. Taretha seemed pleased. She turned again to Thrall. I know it sounds foolish to say, but be careful. I wish to see you tomorrow night to celebrate your victory. She hesitated, then said, I have heard rumors of your powers, Thrall. Are they true? I don't know what you have heard, but I have learned the ways of the shamans. I can control the elements. Yes. Her face was radiant. Then Blackmore cannot possibly stand against you. Be merciful in your victory, Thrall. You know we are not all like him. Yeah, I want you to have this. I've been so long without it, it doesn't feel right for me to keep it any more. She inclined her head and removed the silver chain and crescent pendant. Dropping it in Thrall's hand, she folded his fingers over it. Keep it. Give it to your child, if you have one. Perhaps I may visit him one day. As she had done so many months ago, Taretha stepped forward and hugged Thrall as best she could. This time he was not surprised by the gesture, but welcomed it and returned it. He let his hand caress her golden silky hair and desperately hoped that they would both survive the coming conflict. She pulled back, reached up to touch his strong, jawed face, turned and nodded to the others, then turned and purposefully strode back the way she had come. He watched her leave with a strange feeling in his heart, holding her necklace tightly. Be safe, Tari. Be safe. It was only when she was well away from the orcs that Tari permitted the tears to come. She was so afraid, so dreadfully afraid. Despite her brave words, she didn't want to die any more than anyone else did. She hoped Thrall would be able to control his people, but she knew that he was unique. Not all orcs shared his tolerant views toward humans. If only Blackmore could be persuaded to see reason. But that was as likely as her suddenly sprouting wings and flying away from all of this. Although she was human, she wished for an orc victory, Thrall's victory. If he survived, she knew the humans would be treated with compassion. If he fell, she could not be certain of that. And if Blackmore won, well, what Thrall had experienced as a slave would be as nothing to the torment Blackmore would put him through now. She turned to the little stable, opened the trapdoor, and stepped down into the tunnel. Her thoughts were so full of Thrall and the coming conflict that this time the darkness bothered her hardly at all. Taretha was still deep in thought when she ascended the stairs to Blackmore's room and eased the door open. Abruptly, dark lanterns were unshielded. Taretha gasped. Seated in a chair directly opposite the secret door was Blackmore, with Langston and two rough-looking armed guardsmen. Blackmore was stone-cold sober, and his dark eyes glittered in the candlelight. His beard parted in a smile that resembled that of a hungry predator. Well met, my traitor, he said silkily. We've been waiting for you. Knew it. I was going to predict that if we didn't read that in this chapter, that's how the next one was going to start. Things are bad for Taretha. Best case scenario, we got some torture and beatings coming for her, but based on what we've read in Chronicles, it's going to be a lot worse than that. We've only got 2 chapters left, and I firmly believe we've got to have something going to the last one. The finale's coming up. It's going to start with a negotiation. They might break this finale up over the last 2 chapters, and we just get like a page or so of what happens next. They could go that way as well, but so the final conflict begins in the next chapter, and it might end in it too. All right, this episode is in the pipes 5 by 5. I thank everyone so much for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time on Lore of Warcraft.